Hello everyone, my name is Wally, and in this video I'll be presenting our paper, Standalone Augmented Reality Neuronavigation System for Transcranial Magnetic Stimulation. First, some background. Over 300 million people in the world are affected by major depressive disorder, a mental health condition more commonly known as depression. While medications such as antidepressants can help alleviate symptoms, approximately 30% of those diagnosed with depression are unresponsive to these treatments. For these patients, transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, is a valuable treatment option. In TMS, a magnetic coil is used to stimulate regions of the brain associated with less electrical activity in patients with depression than in healthy people. You can think of it as how you stimulate muscles in the gym to help strengthen them. As the treatment uses magnetic fields to induce the stimulation, the procedure is entirely non-invasive. The main region that is weakened, and thus the primary target of TMS, is a part of the brain called the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. In a standard clinical procedure, this region is targeted by identifying the motor strip in the brain and then positioning the coil approximately 5 centimeters away from it. However, this method is imprecise and does not take into account the individual brain variations between patients. Neuronavigation systems guide an operator to accurately place a coil at the correct location on a patient's head. These systems are highly accurate and sophisticated, but they tend to be expensive, costing upwards of $50,000. Additionally, these systems require rooms that can fit external tracking cameras that are used to identify the pose of the various instruments used during the procedure. New training programs are also required to help train operators to use these systems. Lastly, these systems tend to be non-ergonomic, as oftentimes the operator has to shift visual contact between the patient and a separate screen that contains the guidance information. This is especially uncomfortable as effective treatment protocols require multiple sessions over the course of several weeks. To overcome these limitations, we developed the ARNS, an augmented reality-based neuronavigation system that runs entirely on a HoloLens 2 headset. The system superimposes guidance information directly within a TMS operator's point of view, offering a more comfortable guidance experience. We also leverage the onboard infrared cameras on the HoloLens 2 instead of relying on external tracking systems to track all the instruments that are used for the procedure. Additionally, all the compute runs on a device, so no external computer is needed. This enables the ARNS to be a lower cost and more compact solution than current neuronavigation systems for TMS. To control the ARNS, we opted for a physical interface using a foot pedal controller and sensors overlaid on the TMS coil. This scheme avoids issues with hand gestures, as a TMS operator is often holding an instrument with their hands, and reliability and latency issues with voice commands. Inputs are communicated to the HoloLens 2 via Bluetooth through a microcontroller. The physical setup emulates the controller for some neuronavigation systems for TMS, offering familiarity for those used to those systems. There are various instruments and fiducials that are tracked for the TMS neuronavigation system. These include the registration pointer, the TMS coil fiducial, the head tracking fiducial, and the coil calibration plate. As mentioned earlier, we use the infrared cameras on the HoloLens 2 and computer vision techniques to identify the reflective markers on each of these instruments and fiducials, and subsequently their poses in real time. The reflective markers on each of these instruments have sufficiently distinct spatial configurations, enabling us to identify which one is which when all are in view. We programmed the ARNS with the registration and setup pipeline mirroring some commercial neuronavigation systems. To register the patient onto the HoloLens 2 coordinate system, the operator places the registration pointer at pre-identified landmarks on the patient's head to acquire corresponding points that are used for registration. The fiducial attached to the coil can be arbitrarily placed and thus also needs to be registered to the ARNS. The operator places the TMS coil onto a coil calibration plate in order to calibrate the coil pose. During a TMS procedure, a translucent magenta coil indicates the proper coil placement on the patient's head. The operator aligns the physical coil with this target. The physical coil is also overlaid with a virtual model that changes color depending on the coil placement, providing visual feedback to the operator. The coil overlay turns yellow if the coil is aligned vertically with the translucent magenta coil, and green if it is aligned in both position and orientation. We considered several approaches to comparing the ARNS to the Localite TMS Navigator, a commercial neuronavigation system. Directly comparing the pose errors was non-ideal due to the dependence on each system's localization. Theoretically, a system could claim zero error for a coil placement when in reality the placement was completely off target. Alternatively, we could have also tested on a volunteer and stimulate a region in the motor cortex that induces a muscle twitch in the finger. The strength of the muscle twitch would be indicative of the placement accuracy. However, testing on a participant can be inconsistent due to desensitization and other effects. Ultimately, we decided to build a phantom consisting of a mannequin head embedded with Hall effect sensors, which would offer a higher level of consistency than testing on a human participant while also retaining the benefit of the objectivity. The phantom measures how strongly the stimulation is delivered at a site based on the measured magnetic field output, which is directly influenced by the coil pose. The phantom contains 4 Hall effect sensors and thus 4 stimulation sites. The sensors are attached to a data acquisition device sampling at 100 kHz. We calculated the optimal coil placement for each site that maximized the respective sensor response to the coil's magnetic pulse. The positions of the sensors are known through CT imaging the phantom. The optimal position was taken as the point on the surface of the phantom closest to the sensor location, constrained to the sensor plane. The optimal orientation was taken such that the axes of the coil handle and the axis perpendicular to the flat side of the coil lied on the sensor plane. The higher the pose error from this optimal placement, the weaker the measured field strength is. The figure on the right shows a single pulse outputted by the coil, measured by all 4 sensors. The target site was sensor 1 in blue, which has the highest amplitude compared to the other sites. For the evaluation, we tested the ARNS for non-inferiority to the Localite TMS Navigator. We designed the study as a controlled system validation with a single experimenter familiar with both systems, producing training effects and interoperator variability. During the experiment, the experimenter placed the TMS coil at each of the 4 stimulation sites on the phantom 30 times. The order was randomized in a way such that for every 4 sites, each site appeared exactly once. The process was then repeated for the Localite TMS Navigator. We measured the amplitudes of the magnetic pulses outputted by the coil and evaluated the distributions for each site and modality, visualized in the violin plot on the left. We also adapted the Welk's t-test for non-inferiority and generated the confidence interval plot on the right. To demonstrate non-inferiority, the confidence interval for the mean difference in amplitudes between the ARNS and the Localite TMS Navigator must lie within the shaded margin. The results indicated that across most sites, the ARNS was non-inferior to the Localite TMS Navigator. In conclusion, we successfully developed the ARNS as a compact, lower-cost neuronavigation system for TMS compared to current solutions. The system contains a complete workflow for patient registration, coil calibration, and guidance while operating entirely within a head-mounted display. We built a TMS Phantom to facilitate an objective comparison between the ARNS and the Localite TMS Navigator. Our experiments demonstrated that the ARNS was non-inferior to the Localite TMS Navigator in most cases. Future work will involve user studies, as our evaluation consisted of only a single experimenter, which, although that helped isolate the technical performance of the ARNS, it did not provide enough information on the generalizability of our system to a broader population. Additionally, improvements to the user interface can be made and further evaluated to provide even more intuitive guidance. Lastly, clinical studies will be performed to determine the treatment efficacy of our system. This concludes our video presentation. For more details, please refer to our paper. Thank you for listening.